This is for educational use only. Our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardenes, to use this as an educational material. Six core claims of globalization. Claim 1. Globalization is about the liberalization and global integration of markets. Claim 2. Globalization is inevitable and irreversible. Claim 3. Nobody is in charge of globalization. Claim 4. Globalization benefits everyone. Claim 5. Globalization furthers the spread of democracy in the world. Claim 6. Globalization requires a global war on terror.
Globalization is the process of increasing interconnectedness between countries and people around the world. This interconnectedness is driven by the free flow of goods, services, capital, people, and ideas. One of the key aspects of globalization is the liberalization and global integration of markets. This means that barriers to trade and investments are being reduced and that businesses are and people are increasingly able to operate and communicate across borders. There are a number of reasons why this is happening. One reason is the decline of trade barriers. In the past, many countries had high tariffs and other barriers to trade. However, these barriers have been reduced in recent decades through a number of international agreements such as the World Trade Organization or WTO. Another reason for the liberalization and global integration of markets is the development of new technologies. These technologies, such as the Internet and the World Wide Web, had made it easier for businesses and people to communicate and trade with each other across borders. Here are some concrete examples of globalization that are about the liberalization and global integration of markets. Global supply chains. Global supply chains are the networks of businesses that are involved in the production and distribution of goods and services. They are often span multiple countries and continents. Global supply chains are a major driver of globalization as they allow businesses to source goods and services from the most efficient and cost-effective locations. 2. Technology. Technology has played a major role in the globalization of markets. Advances in transportation and communication have made it easier and cheaper to move goods and people across borders. Technology has also made it easier for businesses to operate in multiple countries.
Pros. First, increase economic growth. Globalization has led to increased economic growth in many countries. This is because it has allowed businesses to expand into new markets and sell their products to more people. Second, increase innovation. Globalization has led to increased innovation. This is because businesses have been forced to become more efficient and productive in order to compete in the global market. Third, reduce poverty. Globalization has helped to reduce poverty in many countries. This is because it has created jobs and opportunities for people in developing countries. Fourth, increase access to goods and services. Globalization has made it easier for people to access goods and services from over the world. This has led to a wider variety of choices for consumers. Fifth, increased understanding and tolerance. Globalization has led to increased understanding and tolerance between different cultures. This is because people are more exposed to different cultures through travel, trade, and communication. The cons. First, increase inequality. Globalization has led to increased inequality in some countries. This is because the benefits of globalization have not been evenly distributed. Some people and countries have benefited more than others. Second, environmental degradation. Globalization has led to environmental degradation. In some cases, this is because businesses are often more concerned with profits than with environmental protection. Third, loss of jobs. Globalization has led to the loss of jobs in some industries. This is because businesses have moved jobs to countries with lower labor costs. Fourth, cultural homogenization. Globalization has led to cultural homogenization in some cases. This is because businesses and media companies have spread Western values and culture around the world. Fifth, loss of national sovereignty. Globalization has led to some loss of national sovereignty. This is because bus- businesses and organizations are increasingly operating outside of the control of national governments.
Claim number 2. Globalization is inevitable and irreversible. The claim that globalization is inevitable and irreversible is based on the idea that the forces of globalization are too powerful to be stopped. These forces include the development of new technologies, the decline of trade barriers, and the increasing interconnectedness of the world economy. There is some evidence to support this claim. For example, the development of new technologies, such as Internet and the World Wide Web, has made it easier for people and businesses to communicate and trade with each other across borders. This has led to a more interconnected world economy. The decline of trade barriers has also contributed to globalization in the past. Many countries have high tariffs and other barriers to trade. However, these barriers have been reduced in recent decades through a number of international agreements, such as a World Trade Organization or WTO. This has made it easier for businesses to trade goods and services across borders. Here are some concrete examples about how globalization is inevitable and irreversible. First is political integration. There is a trend towards political integration, such as the formation of the European Union. This trend is likely to continue as countries seek to cooperate with each other to address common challenges. Next is cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is a spread of ideas, customs, and values from one culture to another. This process is happening at an accelerated pace due to globalization. As cultures become more interconnected, it is becoming more difficult to isolate oneself from other cultures. Pros of globalization: improved standards of living. Globalization has led to improved standards of living in many countries. This is due to the increased access to goods and services that globalization has made possible. Cons of globalization: environmental degradation. Globalization has contributed to environmental degradation in some cases. This is due to the increased production and consumption that globalization has brought about.
The third claim is nobody is in charge of globalization. So the claim that nobody is in charge of globalization is meant to emphasize that globalization is not a conspiracy by a small group of powerful people. Rather, rather it is a complex process that is driven by many different factors, including the development of new technologies, the decline of trade barriers, and the increasing interconnectedness of the world economy. There is no single person or organization that can be said to be in charge of globalization. However, there are numbers of actors who play a role in shaping globalizations, including which is can play a role in a shaping globalization by setting trade policies, regulating business, and investing in education and infrastructure. The other one is business, which is a major drivers of globalization. They invest in a new markets, produce goods and services that are sold around the world, and employ people from different countries. The other one is non-governmental organization, which is or NGOs, which is to work to promote social and environmental justice in the context of globalization. They advocate for policies that protect workers' rights, promote sustainable development, and combat poverty. The last one is individuals. They make choices that can affect globalization. For example, when people buy products made in other countries, they are participating in globalization. The claim that nobody is in charge of globalization is not meant to say that globalization is a chaotic or uncontrollable process. Rather, it's meant to emphasize that globalization is a complex process that is shaped by the action of many different actors. So, here are some concrete examples of how nobody is in charge of globalization. So, the development of new technologies such as the internet and the World Wide Web has made it easier for people and business to communicate and trade with each other across borders. This has happened without any one person or organization being in charge. The other example is the decline of trade barriers, such as tariffs and quotas, has made it easier business to trade goods and service across borders. This has also happened without any one person organizations being in charge. The other one example is the increasing interconnectedness of the world economy as measured by the flow of goods, services, capital, and people has been driven by a number of factors, including the development of new technologies and the decline of trade barriers. This interconnectedness has also happened without any one person organization being in charge. These are just a few examples of how globalization is a complex process that is shaped by the action of many different actors. There is no single or organization that can be said to be in charge of globalization. So the pros and the cons. The pros of this topic is it emphasizes that globalization is a complex process that is shaped by the actions of many different actors. Can help to prevent people from blaming a single person or organization for the negative effects of globalization. The other one is it can lead greater cooperation and coordination between different actors. This can help to mitigate the negative effects of globalizations and promote its positive effects. The other one is it can help to create a more democratic and equitable plus globalization. This is because it gives more people say in how globalization is shaped. The cons. It can lead to lack of coordination and coherence in process of globalization. They can make it difficult to address the negative effects of globalization. The other one is it can lead to a situation where the powerful actor is globalization are able to shape the process to their own advantage. This can make it difficult for the less powerful actors to benefit from globalization. The other one is it can lead to a sense of helplessness and apathy among people who feel they cannot control the process of globalization.
Claim number 4, globalization benefits everyone. This claim that globalization benefits everyone is a complex one. There is no doubt that globalization has brought benefits to many people around the world, such as increased economic growth, innovation, and access to goods and services. But however, there are also some people who have not benefited from this globalization, and there are some negative effects of this globalization, such as environmental degradation and cultural homogenization. I give you some example, the pros and the cons, the advantage and the disadvantage of this globalization that benefits everyone. So let's start for the pros. Like I said, the increased economic growth, it has led to increase the economic growth in many countries because it has allowed business to expand into new markets and sell their products to more people. And for example of that, the World Bank statement that globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty since 1990. And the other one is the encourage innovation, reduce poverty. Reduce poverty has helped to reduce poverty in many countries because It has created jobs and opportunities for people developing countries. For example of that, the number of people living in extreme poverty has been declining steadily in recent decades. And the other one is increased access to goods and services and increased understanding and tolerance. So that are some example of the pros, that advantage of that globalization that benefits everyone. So we now move for the cons, that is advantage of this globalization. So for example of that is increased inequality. This globalization is increased inequality in some countries because benefits of globalization have not been evenly distributed. Some people and countries have benefited more than the others. And another of that is the loss of jobs, has led the loss of jobs in some industries because business have moved jobs to countries with lower labor costs. And another example of that is environmental degradation because environmental degradation in some cases the business are often more concerned with profits than with environmental protection. So that are the cons of this globalization, and that are the example, the pros and the cons of this globalization that benefits everyone.
Claim number 5. Globalization furthers the spread of democracy in the world. So, there is no doubt that globalization has some positive effects on democracy, such as increasing the flows of information and ideas. However, there are also some challenges in globalization democracy, such as rise of multinational corporation and erosion of the national sovereignty. Here are some concrete examples of how globalization has furthered the spread of democracy in the world. First is the increased flow of information and ideas. This has helped to promote democracy by giving people more knowledge about political system and values. For example, the Arab Spring was a series of democratic uprisings in the Middle East that were inspired by the spread of information and ideas through social media.
Second is promoting economic development. This has led to an increase in living standard and declining poverty, which can create conditions that are more conducive to democracy. For example, South Korea and Taiwan are two countries that have experienced rapid economic development as a result of globalization, and they have also become more democratic over time. Third, increased cooperation and interdependence. This can help to promote democracy by creating and sharing interest in resolving common problems. For example, the European Union is an example of a regional organizations that has been created through globalization. The EU has helped to promote democracy in its member state by providing a forum, by cooperating, and by upholding common democratic values. And the fourth is the increased awareness of human rights. This can also help to raise awareness of human rights issues around the world and help to promote democracy by putting pressure on government to respect the rights of citizens. For example, the United Nations is an international organization that has been created to promote human rights and democracy. The UN has helped to raise and awareness human rights issues around the world and has also put pressure on government to respect the rights of their citizens.
So, here are some of the pros and cons of globalization for democracy. So, the pros are increased flow of information and ideas. Globalization has made it easier for people to access information and ideas from around the world. This has helped to promote democracy by giving people more knowledge about different political systems and values. Promoting economic development. Globalization has helped to promote economic development in many countries. This has led to an increase in living standards and a decline in poverty, which can create conditions that are more conducive to democracy. Increased cooperation and interdependence. So, globalization has led to increased cooperation and interdependence between countries. This can help to promote democracy by creating a shared interest in resolving common problems. Increased awareness of human rights. Globalization has helped to raise awareness of human rights issues around the world. This can help to promote democracy by putting pressure governments to respect the rights of their citizens. So the cons are rise of multinational corporations. Multinational corporations have become increasingly powerful in global economy. This can pose a challenge to democracy because this corporation can often wield more power than governments. Erosion of national sovereignty. Globalization has led to the erosion of national sovereignty. This means that governments have less control over their own economies and societies. This can pose a challenge to democracy because it can make more difficult for governments to respond to the needs of their citizens. So, cultural homogenizations. Globalization can lead to cultural homogenizations. This means that different cultures can become more similar over time. This can pose a challenge to democracy because it can make it more difficult for people to maintain their own cultures and identities. Increased inequality. Globalization has led to increased inequality in some countries. This means that the gap between the rich and the poor was widened. This can pose a challenge to democracy because it can lead to social unrest and instability. Ultimately, the question of whether globalization furthers that spread of democracy is the world is a complex one. There is no answer. However, it is important to be aware and the pros and cons of globalization for democracy in order to inform decisions about its future.
Sixth claim: globalization requires a global war on terror. The claim that globalization requires a global war on terror is a complex one. There is no doubt that terrorism is a threat to globalization, as it can disrupt trade and investment, damage tourism, and undermine public confidence. However, there is also a debate about whether a global war on terror is the best way to address this threat. Here are some of arguments in favor of global war on terror. Terrorism is a global threat. Terrorism is not limited to any one country or region. It is a global phenomenon that can strike anywhere. This means that a global response is needed to address the threat of terrorism. Terrorism can be defeated. There is no doubt that terrorism is a serious threat, but it is not invincible. There have been success in the fight against terrorism, such as killing of Osama bin Laden and the dismantling of Al Qaeda's core leadership. This suggests that terrorism can be defeated with a sustained and coordinated effort. A global war on terror can deter future attacks. A global war on terror can send a message to terrorists that they will not be tolerated and that they will be brought to justice. This can deter future attacks and make it more difficult for terrorists to operate. Here are some of the arguments against a global war on terror. The war on terror is counterproductive. The war on terror has been criticized for being counterproductive. It has been argued that the war has created more terrorists than it has killed, and that it has alienated Muslim communities around the world. The war on terror is expensive. The war on terror has been very expensive, both in terms of human life and financial resources. This money could be better spent on their other priorities such as development and poverty alleviation. The war on terror is not sustainable. The war on terror is not sustainable in the long term. It is not possible to keep troops deployed in every country that is at risk of terrorism. Ultimately, the question of whether globalization requires a global war on terror is a complex one. There is no easy answer, however, it is important to be aware of the argument for and against a global war on terror in order to make informed decisions about its future. There are a number of reasons why globalization requires a global war on terror. First, globalization has made it easier for terrorists to operate. Terrorists can now travel more easily, communicate more easily, and raise more money more easily, thanks to globalization. Second, globalization has created new vulnerabilities that terrorists can exploit. For example, the global financial system can be used to launder money, and the global transportation system can be used to transport weapons and explosives. Third, globalization has led to increased interconnectedness between countries. This means that a terrorist attack in one country can have ripple effects in other countries. Global war on terror is a complex and challenging undertaking. There is no single solution that will work for all countries. However, there are a number of things that countries can do to work together to combat terrorism. These include sharing intelligence. Countries must share intelligence with each other in order to track down terrorists and prevent attacks. Strengthening border security. Countries must strengthen their border security to prevent terrorists from entering their countries. Improving financial regulation. Countries must improve their financial regulation to prevent terrorists from laundering money. Combating radicalization. Countries must combat radicalization in order to prevent people from becoming terrorists. Promoting development. Countries must promote development in order to address the root causes of terrorism.
Here are some concrete examples of how globalization can require a global war on terror. So first, the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 attacks were a major turning point in the debate about globalization and terrorism. The attacks showed that terrorists could use globalization to their advantage by exploiting the interconnectedness of the world to plan and carry out attacks. Second, the rise of ISIS. The rise of ISIS is another example of how globalization can facilitate terrorism. ISIS is a terrorist group that has used social media and other technologies to spread its message and recruit new members. Lastly, the rise of cyberterrorism. Cyberterrorism is a growing threat that arises from globalization. Cyberterrorists can use the internet to launch attacks on a critical infrastructure, such as power grids and financial systems. These are just some examples of how globalization can require a global war on terror. It is important to note that the threat of terrorism is complex and evolving, and there is no single solution that will address it. However, a global approach is essential to combating terrorism and protecting the benefits of globalization. It is also important to note that there are other ways to address the threat of terrorism besides of a global war on terror. These include, first, addressing the root cause of terrorism. Terrorism is often rooted in poverty, inequality, and political instability. Addressing this root cause can help to reduce the appeal of terrorism. Promoting education and understanding. Education and understanding can help to break down the stereotypes and prejudice that can lead to terrorism. Building international cooperation. International cooperation is essential to sharing intelligence and coordinating response to terrorist threats. Protecting human rights. Human rights abuses can create a climate of resentment and anger that can fuel terrorism. Protecting human rights is essential of preventing terrorism. These are just some examples of ways to address the threat of terrorism. It is important to consider a range of approaches in order to combat terrorism and protect the benefits of globalization. The claim of globalization requires a global war on terror is a complex one, and there are both pros and cons. To the argument. Pros: a global war on terror can deter future attacks. A coordinated international effort to combat terrorism can send a message to terrorists that they will not be tolerated and that they will be brought to justice. This can deter future attacks and make it more difficult for terrorists to operate. A global war on terror can disrupt terrorist networks. Terrorist networks rely on the free flow of people, goods, and information. A global war terror can disrupt these networks by sharing intelligence, enforcing and travel restriction, and cracking down on the financial support of terrorism. Lastly, a global war on terror can build international cooperation. The fight against terrorism requires international cooperation. A global war on terror can help to build trust and cooperation between countries, which can be beneficial in other areas, such as trade and security. The cons. First, the war on terror is expensive. The war on terror has been very expensive, both in terms of human and financial resources. This money could be better spent on priorities such as development and poverty alleviation. The war on terror is not sustainable. The war on terror is not sustainable in the long term. It is not possible to keep troops deployed in every country that is risk of terrorism. The war on terror can be used to justify human rights abuses. There have been allegations that the war on terror has been used to detain people without charge, torture suspects, violate the privacy of individuals. Ultimately, the question of whether globalization requires a global war on terror is a complex one.
There's no easy answer. However, it is important to be aware of the pros and cons of global war and terror in order to make informed decisions about its future.